Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to the 2023 Sunstone Symposium, Session 166, LDS Women in Garments, a study on the impact of religious clothing on body image and sexuality. The audio from this session will be available for purchase at sunstone.org starting August 15th. Please type any questions you have into the Whova app to be addressed during the question and answer, or ask them into the audience microphone during the Q&A portion of the session. At Sunstone, our motto is more than one way to Mormon. We want to foster an environment that allows many ways for people to express their faith. We invite you to help us build a community where all paths are given space to be better understood. Please support us in our mission by making a donation and subscribing at sunstone.org. About this presentation, it will highlight a research project done at the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth, that looks at the impact of religious garments on body image and sexuality in LDS women, an understudied group. A mixed method approach utilizing a survey and an in-depth interviews allowed for nuanced and extensive information about body image among LDS women, while also providing quantitative data that can be analyzed to look for differences in generational groups, as well as in racial minorities and LGBTQ+ individuals. Interviews and survey comments reveal an array of variables that contribute to a woman's experience, including social judgment, church messaging about body and modesty, and the reproductive processes of the female body. In the midst of struggles with garments, many active women maintain belief in the sacred nature of garments, which illustrates that this is a complex issue where women negotiate the meaning of garments with difficult aspects of wearing them day to day. I'll take a second to introduce you to our speaker before we begin. Larissa Cano Kindred is a graduate student in mental health counseling at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. With a BA in Women's and Gender Studies, her academic focus is on gender dynamics and the intersection of race, gender, and sexuality in mental health. She's proud to be a mixed-race Asian American, an adoptive mom, and a breast cancer survivor. Sunstone is an open forum, therefore the presenters' opinions and histories are their own. I'll now give the floor to our presenter.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming to this presentation. This project is my baby, and I've put so much of myself into it over the last year, and so I'm really excited to talk about garments with you guys today. So first of all, I'm going to tell you, hang on a sec if this would work, how this project got started for me. So in 2022, I was a student in the Women's and Gender Studies program at UMass, and we were discussing Islamophobia and how it affects Muslim women specifically. I read a study at that time called To Veil or Not to Veil, and it was about the shifting attitudes of American Muslim women around the wearing of hijab. I was struck by how many similarities I was consistently seeing between Muslim women and LDS women. A year earlier, Ruth Graham's New York Times article had come out about the struggles a growing group of LDS women were expressing about their garments. In my personal life and online, I have seen a shift in LDS culture where more women are openly expressing discontent with their garments and are negotiating how and when to wear them. This is also being tracked among Muslim women, especially in Western countries like the United States. So around the same time, a woman in Iran named Mahsa Amini died after being beaten in police custody because she wasn't wearing hijab in the way prescribed by the law. Her death ignited protests throughout Iran and the rest of the world as women took to the streets in opposition to a legalized dress code. For many women who were protesting, hijab is sacred to them, but the protest is against institutional regulation. As I watched this unfold, I kept thinking, LDS women have to be a part of this conversation. Women's gendered experience with religious clothing is just as relevant today as it ever was, and women in the LDS Church have something very valuable to contribute. So that's how this project was born. LDS women are a relatively understudied group, so I had high interest from my women's studies professors. I chose body image and sexuality as my focus because much of what I've heard in online spaces from LDS women was centered around those topics. The goal of this research project is to look at the impact of the mandatory wearing of religious garments on LDS women and to better understand how this practice influences a woman's relationship to her body. Because religious beliefs are a very sensitive topic, one of my priorities was to keep focus on how garments affect body image, not to critique or give commentary on personal beliefs regarding garments or about the LDS Church. One quick note, I use the acronym LDS to refer to members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This project focuses mostly on American LDS women, and it doesn't include other Mormon groups such as FLDS women, but that would be a really interesting study too. Okay, so we are going to start off by talking about what we know about body image. Body image is a relatively new area of study, with 90% of the studies coming out after 1980. Since then, it's been the focus of extensive research. It's very helpful to remember that many of our parents didn't grow up with these conversations or even language to express how they were relating to their bodies. Body image is a multidimensional construct that includes what you believe about your appearance, how you feel about your body, and how you physically experience life in your body. So body image isn't about, if you're trendy or if you're meeting society's beauty standards, but those things do impact how we feel about our bodies. Negative body image has been linked to disordered eating, low self-esteem, self-harm tendencies, anxiety, depression, and other mood disorders. Poor sexual functioning has been found to be associated with women who suffer from body dissatisfaction with a negative impact on intimate relationships. There are also studies that show the flip side of that, that when women have positive body image, they usually have higher perceived relationship quality through greater sexual satisfaction. I also want to note that both men and women experience body dissatisfaction, but they are affected differently because of societal gender standards and because of the reproductive processes of female bodies. And then lastly, because of its association with mental, physical, and social functioning, body image has found to be a strong predictor of quality of life. Okay, so religious clothing and body image. While there have been many studies on the impact of gender, BMI, and age on body image, it is only in recent years that there has been research about the impact of religious practices on body relationship. Available studies indicate that this relationship is very complex with many possible variables. We've got two very complex things on their own, and to try to understand how they relate to each other is it's very complicated. What we do know is that the intersection of religion and gender has significant impact on a woman's experience and social interactions. That's why it's so valuable to look at the specific role that religious clothing or the practice of body covering plays in how women relate to their bodies. Religious clothing is tied to cultural narratives around modesty and sexuality, so it's also essential to look at how purity or worthiness messages shape religious clothing. Okay, I want to take you through some interesting points from existing literature on religious clothing and gender. In published work, the most frequently studied group is Muslim women. You can see that many studies actually show that there's greater body satisfaction and more positive attitudes to weight and shape than non-Muslim women. And then some studies show that Muslim women are starting to internalize the same thin ideals that Western women do and have the same rates of eating disorders. The mandatory wearing of veils has been viewed by some as an oppression of women. However, this is not fully accepted. Many women argue that Islamic identity, including the use of traditional clothing and veils, actually de-emphasizes appearance and protects them from unrealistic beauty standards. There is a growing cultural divide around the wearing of hijab and whether it is based in doctrine or policy. This makes me laugh every time because I'm like, yep, yes, I have heard this. Okay. And then Muslim women, studies show that they express agency and individuality in how they negotiate the hijab with their gender and their Muslim identity. It's a very fascinating area of study. Okay, Jewish women are another actively studied group. One thing that's very interesting is that Jewish women are often categorized into 3 different groups. They use UO, MO, and secular. UO stands for ultra-Orthodox. MO is modern Orthodox. So ultra-Orthodox is people who are very devout, doing all of the practices, all the traditions. Modern Orthodox are people who still practice but are also kind of linked to, modernism. And then secular Jews are those who grew up Jewish and don't practice, but they are ethnically Jews, so it's part of their tradition, but they no longer practice religiously. I felt that LDS women could be categorized in a similar way, and so that was something that informed my research. Media exposure has been identified as a common variable that affects body image for Jewish women. I think ultra-Orthodox women consume less media, and so they found that was actually gave them it was a protective aspect for them. Modern Orthodox women juggle traditional religious obligations and mainstream cultural values. I'm going to compare this to progressive women in the church in a little bit. And then another interesting thing about Jewish women, they found that social desirability is a common reported issue when trying to study religious groups, especially Jewish women. Social desirability means that sometimes they are interviewed by outside researchers, and they feel that the women are saying what is expected of them to say instead of maybe how they really feel. I thought that was also something that could be seen in LDS women when they are researched. Okay, evangelical women, they have no set religious clothing, but they have a well-defined subculture of modesty and sexuality standards, commonly referred to as purity culture. Studies find that terminology differs by religion, but similar attitudes around women's bodies and sexuality can be seen in many different religious groups. A 2006 study specifically named Mormonism and said that the ethics of purity culture spans various religious sects. For example, Mormons use the word worthiness instead of purity, while Muslims say honor culture instead of purity culture. This is a very, very active area of study. The growing body of literature links the purity movement to benevolent sexism and narratives of shame, and also that it perpetuates rape culture. Purity rhetoric starts with adolescent girls and constructs them as vulnerable and in need of protection by church leaders, fathers, and the state. A study focusing on the intersection of race and religion identified that in purity culture, the ideal pure woman is not just thin, but she is white. So it is deeply rooted in white supremacy. Okay, so we're going to talk about LDS women. The research done on LDS women is growing and will continue. However, historically, they have been an understudied group. And until recent years, there hasn't even been a lot of discourse about garments, and right now most of that discussion happens in online spaces. So why are LDS women an understudied group? First of all, garments are invisible to outsiders. They're not often seen. You remember during the Mitt Romney campaign, there was articles and people were wondering if Ann Romney was wearing her garments when she went on like late night TV. And anyways, so people are more aware of them now, but they have been invisible to outsiders in the past. Another thing is that garments are associated with sacred temple rituals that we are told not to discuss outside the temple. There's also this issue of social desirability. LDS women often don't want to seem weird or to be criticized, so they don't talk extensively to outsiders about their garments. And then lastly, the church has a history of discouraging members from discussing this topic. In fact, the church issued this statement in 1991 after Colleen McDaniel, a professor of philosophy, spoke here at Sunstone about an outsider's view of garments. The church said it was in bad taste and offensive and encouraged members to not attend Sunstone anymore. Their stance has loosened up recently, with the church even releasing their own pictures of garments on their site and in their literature. So I want to show you two recent studies on LDS women that have shaped my work and my approach. The first one was published in 2022. It was done through BYU, called Beliefs, Practices, and Culture, a Mixed Method Study on Religion and Body Esteem. I was very interested in this because it came on the heels of the Ruth Graham New York Times article that detailed women's issues with garments. It did not have a gendered approach, but it found that LDS culture and beliefs have an overall positive impact on body image. The study just makes one reference to the attitudes about garments, and it says many participants described how they wore the temple how when they wore the temple garment, they were reminded of their relationship with God and felt that they should respect their bodies because God would want them to. Okay. In 2014, researchers Nancy Ross and Jessica Finnegan put out a survey designed to get qualitative data on the relationship between church members and their garments, what meaning they ascribe to them, and then the details of their experience wearing them. They had a very substantial response with over 4,500 participants. This survey also did not have a gendered approach, but 79% of their participants were women. Men and women had similar answers when asked about the meaning of garments, but then diverged when asked about medical issues and institutional control, with hundreds of women reporting chronic yeast infections, urinary tract infections associated with garment wearing, as well as difficulties with pregnancy, breastfeeding, and menstruation. So the findings of these two studies are in stark contrast with each other, which brings up questions about how LDS members relate to researchers of varying social locations and the possible effects of institutional hierarchy on research results. Okay, so in designing my project, I chose standpoint theory as an analytical framework to shape my approach. I'm going to give you a short overview of standpoint theory because it's really cool and it is ideal for working with religious groups. Standpoint theory was developed by theorist Sandra Harding with the idea that power dynamics in society will also play out in research, in knowledge production. Also, she said that the viewpoints of marginalized communities are often left out of research. It suggests that people who are marginalized have a special way of knowing because they understand what it's like to be disadvantaged by a system, and they are also very attuned to the way that the dominant group works. Sociologist Patricia Hill Collins uses research on Black women who worked as hired domestic help for white families to explain standpoint theory. These women were viewed as outsiders or others by society, but because they worked in white homes for white women, they developed a wealth of information about power dynamics in society. They understood what it means to be Black, but they also got a front row seat to watch what it is like to be white. These women have had a special type of knowledge because of their position, but for a very long time they were not allowed in universities where research and knowledge production happens. Collins calls their position the outsider within. So here is a rundown of the main tenets of standpoint theory. Standpoint theory asks the question, who creates the discourse? When we're talking about a topic, who is controlling the narrative on this? What power structures are hidden in traditional knowledge production? And it allows all perspectives to contribute to this construction of knowledge. One thing that I feel like is the most helpful thing about standpoint theory, especially when talking about garments, is that whether garments are good or bad is subjective and it's irrelevant. The main point of standpoint theory is to ask who is shaping the narrative, who gets to have a say in what our garments mean to us, and who is it most affecting. There are methods that go with standpoint theory that work well with religious groups because they focus on diversifying research participants, looking critically at who shapes the discourse, assessing the credibility of knowers based on their social location, and then it encourages ongoing self-evaluation in researchers to address their own personal biases. I wanted to include in my project LDS women who have varied relationships with the church and with garments. In my experience, I have heard a lot of invalidation between different groups of LDS women as a way to discredit each other. ex-Mormon women just have an axe to grind, and devout women are just brainwashed, and progressive women are just a bunch of liberal feminists who like to complain. So these are, we hear this in online spaces, don't listen to her, she doesn't speak for us because, she's liberal. So my goal was to gather many perspectives so that we can have more nuance and depth in our information. And here Collins explains how these multiple perspectives work together. This is a really beautiful quote from her. She says, each group speaks from its own standpoint and shares its own partial, situated knowledge, but because each group perceives its own truth as partial, its knowledge is unfinished. Each group becomes better able to consider other groups' standpoints without relinquishing the uniqueness of its own standpoint or suppressing other groups' partial perspectives. That's the goal. Okay, so as I said, one important part of standpoint framework is to look at your own social location and understand how who you are might influence your work as a researcher. As an ex-Mormon woman, I knew that there would be assets and limitations because of my relationship with the church, but overall, I believe that I am uniquely placed to do research on LDS women. I was born and raised LDS and wore garments in the way I was instructed to for almost 20 years. Just like black women were called the outsider within, I consider myself an insider on the outside. I understand the language of Mormons have their own unique language, and there's so much nuance in how we relate to our garments. So those are things that I personally experience, so I understand them. However, being on the outside makes it so that I have no institutional motivations or concerns about church discipline. One of the limitations, some conservative members scrutinized my interest in garments and the topic, and garments as a topic of study. Several felt that I was trying to harm the church or to disrespect their religious clothing. However, they still took the survey. My assumption is that these individuals were concerned that only the views of nuanced members would be represented, which may be less positive about garment wearing, so they took the survey to make sure that positive views were expressed. I like this reasoning because all perspectives need to be represented, but taking the survey with a defensive approach may have produced data from traditional members that is less accurate. So this is a set of questions that go along with the standpoint methodology, as things that you as a researcher should be constantly using to evaluate yourself. Do my values, attitudes, and beliefs enter into the research process? Do I only ask questions from my perspective? How does my own agenda shape what I ask and what I find? How does my position affect how I gather, analyze, and interpret my data, and from whose perspective? And then as another way to check myself and my own personal biases, the project was consistently reviewed by professors during the design process and while it was active, and then devout members of various ages were consulted during the research design process. Especially when writing questions for the survey and for the interviews to make sure that they were open-ended and not leading. Each time the survey was reviewed, changes were made, and a few minor changes were made after the survey went out when I was contacted by participants who had concerns about the wording. Research participants were also informed of my relationship to the church before consenting to participate. Okay, let's move on to the project. Okay, this was a mixed method approach utilizing a survey and in-depth interviews. We had a whopping 8,585 respondents in 2 weeks to an online survey. I did 25 in-depth interviews via email and Zoom. We got demographic data on this group so that we can look at how specific groups are feeling about their garments and then also do comparisons between generational age groups, racial minorities, and LGBTQ plus individuals. One of the most surprising avenues of information was the comments at the end of the survey. There was a place at the end that said, "Would you like to say anything else?" And I had 2,366 additional comments, and they were very long. The survey was very specific. The interviews were semi-structured, but the comment section was the Wild West. It's got everything that you can imagine, and then things that you can't even imagine. It's all there in those comments, and I'm almost overwhelmed trying to think of how to synthesize this data or categorize it, but it's It's insane. People did not hold back in the comments. Okay, this slide is going to be me trying to fit all the relevant demographic data into one slide. This is our age spread. I'm just going to put these up there if you have any questions about these. You can see that most of our participants were between the ages of 25 and 44. How long have you worn garments? How frequently do you wear garments? The gender identity, I had 99% were cisgendered women. So I just had 8 trans women, 3 trans men, 26 non-binary individuals, and 23 that identified as genderqueer. So those are not enough to be a substantial sample population, but they do make interesting case studies. The race and ethnic identity of this group, this is similar to numbers released by Pew Research in 2009, which said that 86% of Mormons in the U.S. are white. 94% were raised in the church, and then 89% were endowed between the ages of 18 and 24. The survey had respondents from every state in the United States and from these countries. So I will say about this, I did not ask if these were missionaries that were living in these countries. They were just asked, what country do you reside in? So that's why this survey really is mostly indicative of, I think, westernized, views on body image. I don't think this would accurately tell us what, somebody in the Philippines is experiencing. But there were people from all over that took this, so. Okay, so this is a question that was asked in the survey, and I got this idea from the studies done on Jewish women, and I think it's one of the most important parts of the survey. It was a lot to ask women to define their relationship to the church, but I really wanted to be able to see the differences between the groups. That way we can compare the groups and then also look at them individually. This is the way we broke it down. Traditional devout, I sustained leadership and strive to follow the teachings. Nuanced progressive, those are commonly used words in Mormon circles, and so I use those specifically for that. Identified that as active, but I don't subscribe to all the teachings. I believe the restoration is ongoing, so I'm hoping some aspects will change. Ex-Mormon was I purposefully left or was excommunicated, and then inactive but believing meant that they still believe in church teachings but don't consistently participate. There was an other category on this question where you could write in something, and so many women started out with, it's complicated. Okay, this survey had 25 questions, and I'm just going to show you a handful of them, just the ones that I felt like are most interesting for me. Oh, let me show you this breakdown. I didn't show you this yet. Okay, so of all the respondents to this survey, 65% identified as LDS, with 35% identifying as ex-Mormon. And then out of those that identify as LDS, we had 37% traditional devout, almost 59% nuanced progressive, and 4% inactive but believing. So about the nuanced progressive women, we may have accessed this group of people because of the online spaces that we were in, but I also think there's something else, is I wonder how many women are identifying as nuanced progressive women in the church because they are having to negotiate parts of being a woman and being in the church. When we put the survey out, it was spread on social media, and I knew that the ex-Mormon women would share this and they would spill the beans. I knew that nuanced progressive women would spill the beans. So I put almost all of my efforts into accessing traditional devout members. And it was posted on mission groups, for sister missionaries. It was posted in Facebook groups that are for women serving in Relief Society presidencies or young women presidencies. One of them that it was posted in was for young women's presidencies, and I think it had close to 30,000 members in it. And so that's what I spent most of my time doing, was trying to get it to traditional devout members. I also asked people to share it with parents or with siblings if they would take it as well, because I knew that would be a good way to also access older demographics as well. Okay. We're going to go through these questions. Okay, did the way you dress change after you started wearing garments, and how did you feel about the change? So you can kind of see how this breakdown goes. Whenever there's an other in this survey, there was a comment with it. Many women wrote that they had been raised in an environment where they were supposed to wear garment standards first. And so I think that's why we have a huge number that said there really wasn't a change when they went through the temple and became endowed, is because they were already kind of dressing in garment standards before they went. How do your garments affect your ability to express your personal style? Again, this question is about self-expression, not about trends. So this wasn't about saying, like, do you feel like you get to be trendy? It was about, do you feel that you can express who you want to be? Okay. On this slide, I'm going to show you, this is my overall group, and then I'm going to flip it, and I'm going to show you what just the active women said. So for you, what are the positive aspects of wearing garments? So you can see that when we look at the overall group, so people could choose multiple ones on this. And you can see that when we look at the whole group, the one that was marked the most was, I feel that I am being obedient. And then when we switch to just active women, then reminder of temple covenant surges ahead. And so I think it's probably safe to say that women who leave the church lose some of the meaning behind garments, and so they start remembering it like, I just did that because I was obedient. So this is the breakdown of just active women and what they said. So yeah. Okay, tell me if I'm going through these too fast. Okay, are there any negative aspects of wearing garments that you've personally experienced? Again, this is the whole group. Uncomfortable fit or fabric was a favorite. And then this is just active LDS women. So even when we're looking at active women, we still have almost 3,000 that marked uncomfortable fit and or fabric. And then this is an interesting one. Have any of the following been more difficult to navigate with garments? So 6,600 marked menstruation. I'm very interested in the red bar, that's exercise and participation in sports, because you don't wear your garments during that time. But again, in the comments, a lot of women said, it makes it awkward in locker rooms, or I feel anxious to get my garments back on after I exercise, or is it okay if I wear my exercise clothing through the day, or am I not being righteous? And so I think that created a lot of stress around it. Yeah.
Can you define the lack of body autonomy? What exactly do you mean by that? On a couple slides ago.
Oh, that was on possible negative aspects. So some women, especially online, had said that they felt like they didn't have autonomy over their body because they felt like they had to wear garments. So it was like, I can't choose not to wear them, or else I'll get in trouble for it. Yeah.
I think it's always been common practice to take off your garments to exercise.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, so this could even be, maybe that's a newer thing. Oh, right, even right now? Yeah. Oh, that's very interesting.
Could you repeat the question for the recording?
Oh, yeah. She mentioned that it hasn't always been common practice to take off garments during exercise.
I would also suggest it affects exercise in that so many women were told not to participate in teams or cheerleading or various things because it wasn't appropriate garment standards. So then there's still this association with sports playing and whether or not it's okay or kind of transgressive.
Yes, that's very interesting, yeah. Okay. All right, moving on. Do you feel attractive when you wear garments, either physically and or sexually appealing? I know, it's sad. This is the entire group of people. And then this is when we take out the ex-Mormons. So we still have 40% that say, no, I don't feel attractive. We have this large group, 40%, that say it doesn't affect how attractive they feel. Overall, how do your garments impact your feelings about your body? Again, this is the entire group. And then this is just active women. So these are substantial numbers even when we take the ex-Mormons out. If you think about, like, if this was your ward, this is a lot of people with a lot of feelings. Okay, this is my favorite one. How do you feel your garments affect physical intimacy? So I'm so intrigued by this because I don't think it was ever practiced to wear your garments during sex. And so we know that they're not worn during that time. Someone in the back is saying, like, maybe it was. I've heard some Mormon mythology about this. But I think that this is where we see that maybe some of the body covering rhetoric comes in to garments. Women indicated that they felt uncomfortable being naked, or feeling like I have to get dressed really quick after, or feeling like maybe my husband doesn't think I'm attractive because I'm wearing my garments. Yes, I can't
She
wait.
actually had letters circulating from the First Presidency telling bishops to stop asking couples whether they are wearing their garments during sex and to make that a personal matter. That was actually an official church publication saying, stop doing this.
Oh my gosh, I'm going to look that up. That's amazing. Just so I can see the words. Okay, so yeah, obviously this is still, these are some cultural dynamics that are still at play. Okay, this is active women. So this is the same question, but just active women. Very, very interesting. Okay, given the option, would you continue to wear garments as a reminder of your covenants, or would you opt for a different type of a reminder? So this is the entire group. And then this is just active women. We had some great suggestions for, you could write in an option, and there were some very creative suggestions. So someone was like, "Can I please just get a tattoo of the markings? Like, it would be so much easier. Please." I feel like it'd be kind of cool. I don't know. Have you ever felt judgment around your garments and how you wear them? This is from the overall group, and then this is just active women. I'm going to talk more about the social judgment component in just a minute. On a day-to-day basis, do you feel your garments connect you to your temple covenants? This is the overall group. And then this is just active women. It's very interesting. So when this is discussed online, a lot of times people will say, you know, we love our garments, you know, that person complained, that's fringe, you know, that's just, and so I think that was one of my goals is to ask the question, is this fringe? How widespread is this issue in the church? And what does this look like between the different groups? Okay, so I'm going to just talk about a few points of interest that I want to point out. You can see that we are sitting on a lot of data. I really want to hear thoughts and questions about this, but I just want to hit a few points before we open it up. One of the most intriguing patterns I found in the qualitative data was that almost all the interviews and hundreds of comments mentioned checking and adjusting clothing consistently in social settings. This behavior is called body surveillance. Body surveillance is the habitual checking, adjusting, monitoring of clothing and body in social settings. It's a behavior that is seen when a person evaluates their body based on appearance rather than competence. Body surveillance is the behavioral manifestation of self-objectification. And self-objectification happens when women internalize societal messaging that an observer's view is the primary view of their physical selves. Women consistently reported body monitoring and a hyperfixation on their bodies that seemed to come from modesty rhetoric that teaches women to make sure that their clothing completely covers their garments. Many people talked about a double standard where men's garments are like hanging out their sleeves and nobody cares, but they felt like it was a really big deal for women. They were adjusting and checking their garments to make sure that they weren't visible. Women used the word garment checking a lot and to describe this, and it involves checking yourself, checking others, being self-conscious if you're not wearing garments, being self-conscious if it looks like you're not wearing garments, but you are. And then also weight gain was also reported that it led to more body monitoring because garments cover such a large area of the body, and so slight changes in weight were very noticeable. And then this comes from a study done on body surveillance. It says body monitoring can increase women's opportunities for shame and anxiety reduce opportunities for peak motivational states, and diminish awareness of internal body states. Accumulations of such experiences may help account for an array of mental health risks that disproportionately affect women: unipolar depression, sexual dysfunction, and eating disorders. It's a big deal. Okay, another thing that came out of the comments that was very interesting but also sad was that it seems that there is a lot of invalidation from within the community. I'm a mental health counseling student, and so much of my interest is in how people interact and relate to others in their community. Many women expressed that they felt invalidated from within. There were just a handful of women who mentioned how outsiders reacted to their garments, but thousands of women expressed sadness and frustration about being judged for struggling with their garments from inside the community. So I'm going to show you a quick sampling of comments, and I put them side by side so you can kind of juxtapose the struggle with the invalidation. And I want to just say that these are not the most extreme comments. These are the moderate ones. I'm trying to show a dynamic, not get shock value, and so I left the extreme comments out. This woman says, I've talked to 3 therapists about how difficult it is for me to wear garments. I've wrestled with my feelings on them and suffered through wearing them. I finally decided I just can't do it anymore. I only wear them to church and to the temple. I need God to make an exception for me and meet me where I'm at. I have to tell myself that I'm not being rebellious and that this won't damn me from being with my husband and children for eternity. Okay, and on the other side we have, go to the temple, do initiatory work. That's what the garment is about. Whoever cares about the rest, sexiness or personal style, is putting another god before God. Your relationship with Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ and how you nurture your testimony really determine how you feel about wearing them. I just wish there wasn't such judgment and focus on garments, what underwear I wear. I got such bad yeast infections, my midwife told me to stop wearing them. I stopped wearing the bottoms and felt so guilty about it, but my infections cleared up and my health generally improved. Many, many tears regarding this topic, especially through different stages of motherhood and bodily changes. Have never felt understood and could never talk about it with anyone. I don't think Heavenly Father meant for this to be such a sad and difficult experience. I believe that knowing the blessings that come from obedience to God's commandments outweigh the small irritants or frustrations of being too hot, not feeling attractive enough, breastfeeding, and menstruation is difficult. Okay, menstruation as a small irritant, I can't get over that. People are so dramatic when it comes to garments. Just wear them or don't and move on with your life. It's not that complicated. It was so isolating for years to not have validation from anyone about the issues I had with garments. I never pretended to like them, but I think many around me did. I think there is pressure to not be negative about the temple and garments because of how sacred it's supposed to be. I am someone who has suffered for 20 years with feminine health because of the unbreathable situation in the crotch of garments. I have been so embarrassed. I am crying typing this because of the shame I feel. I have never talked about this with anyone. I think garments are just another thing that is easy to do based on the level of conversion to the gospel. The reason I love my garments is that I love God and the covenants that I make more than I love the world. I care more about my soul than my outward appearance. So I want to say, I don't believe that this behavior is natural for women. We could try to chalk this up and say like, oh, you know how women are. No, this is not natural for women. Women thrive when they are being nurtured and mentored by other women. And so we have to ask ourselves what is happening culturally to create this type of dynamic. Was there a hand in the back?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this while I'm asking the question.
Yeah.
I know that there's like a lot of martyrdom complex in these Christian communities.
Could you come to the mic?
The walk of shame. Just kidding. It's not.
Okay, so this idea that these women were saying, I love God more than I love these irritants or the world or whatever, we're all laughing because it's like this pompous little bigots, whatever, right? But from their perspective, right? Now, is this just kind of, are you emphasizing this just because it lacks empathy? Or what is it that called your attention to those particular quotes?
Just because there's invalidation. And as I said before, I think all groups invalidate each other. I was saying, there's judgment to ex-Mormon women judge those that stay, So there's a lot of invalidation in between women, LDS women. And so I do think that these are beliefs that many people feel like there's a suffering element to becoming close to God, or that these things aren't important. A lot of people equated body image with being fashionable, and said, no, I'm putting that off. That is not something I'm doing. I think maybe the laughing in the room is because it's relatable, and we've been in this circumstances. But the thing that I'm bringing this out is because there is invalidation. So there's people struggling, and then there's people who are like, well, I think it's just based on your commitment. And there are LDS women who are saying, I am very committed to the gospel. I'm committed to the church. And it's very hurtful for people to say, you don't love your garments because you're not committed. So I think that's where the issue for me is. I think it's fine to feel like, to have your beliefs around garments, but I do think that this is a dangerous dynamic when we start saying that, because there are so many complex issues with garments, I think it's dangerous to say that you will like garments if you are committed to the Savior. Because that's when people start feeling really bad, and they may be having very significant issues with their bodies. Okay, that was a great question. Okay, thanks. Okay, this is my last thing that I want to talk about is, as I said before, I just had a very small group of LGBTQ plus members, but their experience is very complex because they are at the intersection of religion, gender, and sexuality. I want to share something interesting that came out of my interviews with transgender women. I did 3 interviews with transgender women. 2 are active in the church, and 1 has left. Interestingly, these women had very good associations with their garments. It may be because they had less exposure to modesty rhetoric because they were raised as males in the church. All of them told me that garments were a gender-affirming part of their transition. Garment styles are very gendered. They even come in pink bags and blue bags. And then women's garments have lace on them. And so for them, it was a way that they could kind of affirm their own gender, and because of that, they had good associations with it. It also allowed them to start transitioning privately before they were ready to come out socially, because garments are worn under the clothing. And this is why I bring this up, because I want to talk about this. The 2 active members both expressed that they love the temple, and they are concerned that they will be barred from wearing garments in the future. So when we talk about garments, and we're going to bring standpoint theory back into this, who gets to decide who wears garments? Who gets to decide what they mean to us? Who gets to make the choices around that? And to bring this point home, I want to read a comment that was submitted by a gay woman who took this survey. And I'll just tell you, I've never not cried when I read this, and so I'm not apologizing for it. I'm just warning you. I am LGBTQ and was excommunicated. I found it heartbreaking that the final words of my excommunication were to tell me to remove my garments before leaving the building. I believe the church is wrong on the issue of LGBTQ members. I love the church and my garments, and I grieve their loss. So who gets to wear garments? Who has to wear garments? Who gets to wear garments? Who tells us how we negotiate with them? That's the question I think that we have to ask. And so lastly, why does this matter? I'm just going to go a few last thoughts about this. How women feel in their bodies matters. Embodied experience shapes how we relate to the world, especially our religious experiences. The body positivity movement, which started in the 1960s, has grown into a robust field of scientific research. We cannot underestimate how significant this is. LDS doctrine is unique in that it believes in an embodied God and that our bodies are modeled after His. They teach that one of our main purposes on this earth is to get a body. So this topic should be of paramount interest to the church. And lastly, and this is maybe the most important thing, LDS women have more knowledge and understanding about what it means to wear garments because of how it uniquely affects their everyday embodied experience. If we want to understand garments, I'm sorry to say this, but it will not come from a conference talk. It will come from listening to and validating the words of all types of LDS women. Okay, and if you want to follow this research, I set up a website where I'm constantly updating with my analysis and more data, and there will be more coming so that you can look at how specific groups are relating to their garments. And then this is an Instagram account where I just update, tell about what's going on the website, so if you want to follow. Okay. Okay, I'm ready for questions and comments. This doesn't have to be a question. I want to hear from you.
So I'm the Nancy Ross that you referenced earlier, and I'm writing a book on garments. And
I loved your study. It was very, very influential to me. I follow your work.
Thank you. And so I want to know, when are you gonna publish this? What do you hope to do with this study? I'm really excited to hear.
So I want to get something published, and it's in the process. So I just finished this in May, and I'm planning on working with one of my women's studies professors to get something published with it. So
I'd also be happy to talk to you.
I would love that. Thank you.
I'm so glad I came to this class. I tried 2 others before you, but you stuck.
Oh, good.
Oh, this is so loaded. Have you ever heard that joke that you could tell a Catholic by a Catholic because they go like this and Mormons do this?
Oh. I haven't heard that, but yeah, that sounds right, yeah.
I took some notes. I was married when I was 21 and immediately felt frumpy in my garments. And I was really surprised at the time. I was like a size 28, which was an extra small, and I didn't know they made extra small garments. I thought I was going to have to put on the big baggy things that my mom wore. I took them being told to me that they were a physical protection very seriously, and I believed it. Especially in those younger years when you're worried about sexual assault and stuff like that, they were a comfort to me. They also contributed to my complete shamed Mormon disconnection from my physical body. However, they were really nice and warm in the winter. And I have never slept in anything more comfortable than my Jesus jammies. I finally made my final emotional break with the church in 2018 when Sam Young came to the fore and gave me a platform and validation. But by that time, I was approaching 60, and I just was too embarrassed to wear sleeveless tops, whereas I used to want to wear them when I was younger, but I felt like my arms are old now. I've missed my chance to wear cute clothes that show my arms.
I agree.
Body thing, what do you call it? I suffered with yeast infections for years. I had no idea that those were a contributing factor. I did find it bizarre in the 90s that I had to report to my bishop about how I wore my underwear and if I altered them anyway, because I used to cut out the armpits because they made me sweat when they were cut so close. And that was, I think, one of my first contributing moments in which I stepped away from authority, that I didn't have to talk about my underwear to my bishop. And it wasn't his business if my garments made me sweat more or not. And it was a big deal for me when I got dressed this morning to come here, because I'm not wearing my garments now, but not a day goes by that I don't either wear a top or a bottom or both, at the very least, to sleep in. And they're getting very, very ragged now, and I'm kind of going over in my mind, am I going to buy new ones or not? And it was just a huge victory for me that when I put this top on today, because it's kind of pretty see-through-ish. And it's not sleeveless, but you can see through it. Anyway, thank you for, I didn't expect to come in here telling my story, but man, when you were giving your presentation, it was just trigger, and I realized how much this really has deeply affected me in both bad and strange and some comfortable ways, because after 40 years of wearing garments, they do feel like a second skin, and I haven't wanted to give them up.
Yeah.
So these are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thanks. Let me just say really quick, one thing I find so fascinating about garments is that they are so complex. And while there are many people voicing issues with garments, there were many women that expressed beautiful, beautiful connections with their garments. One that stood out to me is one woman said that she's always, been heavy, viewed as overweight. And she said that when she wears her garments, it reminds her that her size doesn't matter because she is empowered by God. I thought that was a really, really beautiful way to view garments. And so it is so complex, and people can even have poor experiences, and they can still mean something and remind them of their covenants and their relationship to God. So it's a very, very complex issue with a lot of different facets.
I was just wondering if there were any of your personal biases at the start of this project that shifted as you started getting more into it, or if you were pretty steady throughout the process.
So I had a really rigid research methods advisor, and I thought I was being super unbiased, and then she would say, you have to take yourself out of this. And I was like, I did take myself out of this. Didn't you read that? And she was like, no, you need to get way out of this. And I think she told me that several times. It was actually a really hard academic experience for me because I've always been a really good student. And so it was actually hard for me to take that feedback. And so, I really went through a personal process of really checking myself. I do think that my personal experience, I don't think I had a personal bad experience with garments when I wore them. But I came to view garments differently once I left the church. And I do think I was kind of yeah, obviously, this is, people are going to be experiencing this thing. And so I actually think that once I started reading these, stories and hearing people negotiate the sacred nature of garments with also the struggles, I actually think that softened my feelings about garments quite a bit. And to be a feminist researcher, you have to allow people to have their beliefs and hold those things sacred. And so I think that there was growth for me in giving space to women who really love their garments and that they are sacred to them, and knowing that the way that I view garments is not the right thing. It's just how I view garments. And so I think that's probably an area of personal growth for me during this project. Okay, I know you're waiting.
This feels like a weird testimony meeting.
Right? This is the best one I've been to. I don't know.
I think I took that survey because I'm plugged into Mormon Twitter, and I remember all those questions. And at the time, I would consider myself active but nuanced. And I remember just the survey itself, and then talking with, finally feeling free to talk with friends about things that I never thought we could talk about, helped me realize that I have I have terribly heavy periods, and I didn't realize until I finally had the courage to talk to other women that some women choose to not wear their bottoms during their periods. And I was like, what? You can do that? And it blew my mind. And so I I was like, okay, God, I'm doing this. This is going to be fine. And then last summer when Roe v. Wade was overturned, I was so distraught and felt so angry that I like literally took off my garments and like stomped on them because I was feeling like so angry that men would have the nerve to tell me what to do with my body. And it's just been such an interesting thing moving from where those women were to where I am now, and I can still see, like, I mourn the fact that I can't go in the temple. I don't miss garments, but it is so complicated and it's so complex, and your research was so, I thought it did such a good job highlighting those complexities, and just bravo to you.
Thank you. That means a lot. I appreciate that. Yeah. Yeah. Should I repeat it? Okay.
I need to tuck my garments back into my waistband before I stand up and talk. I'm not surprised that there are a lot of negative issues about garments. It's just so totally unsurprising to me because they're kind of supposed to stand for something, I guess. And, sometimes my jeans don't fit me right. And shoes aren't comfortable either. And, I can just think of a million things. And so no biggie. But I do have a really important question for you. And it's kind of about strong women. And I just wonder, especially that example you put up of the person that got excommunicated and they told her to take her garments off. Now, if that had been me, I would say, thank you very much, but I will not be taking my garments off, and I'll wear them whenever I want to. So sometimes I wonder about, I wish a whole bunch of women could be way stronger and start talking about these things. And do you think that could make a difference if women started saying, obviously it would be in the temple interview, if they started complaining a lot or just really making their, issues known, could it possibly make the church move to more comfortable or a different something? What do you think about that?
I think that, I think it's hard to, so much policy comes from the top down. But I do know this about the church is that it runs off the volunteer labor of women. And the church cannot afford to lose its women. And so I do think that there could be a substantial, if women kind of were like, no, we need to make adjustments. These are sacred to me, but there needs to be. I do think, I think that's why bringing it out into the open is good, because it validates other people who are struggling. You hear different perspectives. And so I do think that there could be something substantial that happens. I definitely think this needs to be driven by LDS women. But yeah, I think there could be a thing. So on Reddit, the source of all knowledge, Reddit, I was made aware that there was kind of a thing that people were saying, hey, when you go into your Temple Recommend interview and they ask you about it, just say it's not your business. And, bishops are generally nice guys. And so I think most of them are kind of like, oh, okay, and so there was kind of this like underground movement. And I don't know if it was mostly younger women that were kind of saying like, hey, don't answer the question. We don't have to answer. It's between me and God. And so I don't know. I see movement like this, and I'm interested to see, what active LDS women do to kind of like move this issue forward. But because I don't know. I think women are so essential to the church moving forward, and so I think something could happen. Yeah. Yeah, this is the end. If you want to say something else, you can talk now.
I was curious what your thoughts are on the LDS Church recently changing their recommend question to say throughout your life instead of night and day, and cultural shifts there. I've noticed among BYU Idaho students, you're actually seeing a shift of, well, I wear them once a week so I can answer throughout my life.
You know what? Yeah. There has been many changes in like garment styles and in the recommend questions over time. I think it's a good thing because I actually think it allows a little more leeway for people to negotiate it the way that they feel is right for them. I don't know if the church did that because they already saw that was something that was happening. But yeah, I think generally it's good. It's very interesting, but I think it's good.